Hey, welcome back to the show, everyone. Let's try and capture Metallica's awesome Master of Puppets guitar tone using the Marshall DSL and a Jackson King V loaded with the Seymour Duncan Thrash Factor pickups. It's such an awesome tone, and I've been chasing it my entire life, and it's the reason I bought a Mesa Boogie to start with. As you're all aware, this is such an enormous tone, and it's so hard to get with anything but a Mesa Boogie usually. And I just want to try and use the Marshall DSL today and do my best just to dial that in with some EQ, and we'll just see how close we can get to the Master of Puppets tone. Anyone interested to see the gear and have some notes on how this album was actually recorded, you can go on Flemming Rasmussen's site at Sweet Silence Studios over in Stockholm, Sweden, and he's got a whole list of the EQs that he used in the Mesa Boogie Mark II C+ amps and so forth, and it's really interesting to read. And I suppose if you can get hold of all that gear, you get a fantastic tone to go by and use his notes and get the exact tone. But with these videos, I really enjoy trying to dial in these epic tones using the Marshall DSL. It's quite an affordable amp, and I'm just using basic pedals that aren't much to buy at all. It's a pretty cool discussion to have just to see what's different between a Mesa and a Marshall. Like, what is it about the gain structures or about the output, about just the way the amp reacts to your guitar? And I think the way that I see it and the way I think about like the Mark series boogies is they have a bark about them, a real sudden jolting bark, and the Marshalls tend to have like a roar. So they really do come across as sort of different amps. Equally cool, I love them both, but they're just sort of different. I see myself more as like a Marshall guy. I sort of grew up with the Marshalls around me, and the way that I work out my tones and dial them in, it's very linear. It's very simple. You need more bass, you add more bass. It's just a very straightforward amp to work, whereas the boogies tend to be, as you dial in more bass, things get flabbier. The amp will react to certain EQ inputs, and they're pretty complex to try and use, but great tones to be had out of both of them. It's just really how you use the amp and how you get what you need out of it. With all that said, trying to get this Master of Puppets tone, it really was a difficult tone to try and capture using the Marshall. But essentially, what I did was try and use the Marshall like a boogie in a sense, as that I've backed off the bass a lot just to make things really tight and really focused. You're losing that bottom end in the amp, but in the effects loop, we can then use the EQ 10 band in the effects loop and just try and boost some of the frequencies that are lost in the amp. And so the amp retains being tight and focused, but we can just get it larger, lower end using the EQ. And another effect that I found is really helpful trying to get these Metallica style tones is a parametric EQ. We'll just go through the pedal board now and I'll discuss what effects I've got and how I'm using them. So you can see on my pedal board here, I've got the Boss noise suppressor using the 4 cable method in both the effects loop and the front end to keep both quiet. I'm using the MXR Zach Wild 44 pedal with the gain all the way down and the output and tone fairly centered. And these ODs in the front end of amps really tighten things up, and they get rid of that larger sort of wrapping on a watermelon tone, if I can describe it like that. They tighten things up and make you... They do take a lot of bass out of the mix as well, but they do push some mid frequencies and make your picking very deliberate. And now we turn to the effects loop. The first thing I've got there is the MXR 10 band. I'm pushing some of those lower frequencies, scooping it out slightly at the 1K region, and just a slight buff around the 4 to 8K, just to give it that little bit of top end, I suppose. And the last pedal that I find is really unique to try and capture this Master of Puppets tone is a parametric EQ. And I bought this one back in January, but it took a long time to be made and shipped out to me. And it's only come in the last few weeks. And I've been fiddling around with it, trying to just see how it works and see how it sculpts things. I'm used to using them on Amplitude and a lot of VST software, but I've never really used a parametric EQ apart from that. And so it's been really interesting, and I can really focus in and push some frequencies that is apparent on that album. Master of Puppets is a unique sounding record, and so on some of the solos and things, you can really hear like a wah-wah pedal that's half cocked. So parametric EQs are actually quite difficult to get used to using. You've really got to get familiar with the way that the different dials work, and your Q and your gain and your frequency range and so forth. But when you do, you can really focus in on certain frequencies and get specific tones, like for this purpose. A lot of what I'm doing on the amp, I'm actually counter reversing and doing the opposite with the EQ pedals down here on the floor, so I can make the amp in the front end work how I want to get the style of like output and push from the amp, and then I can just get my desired tone, if that makes sense, out of the pedal board. It really is a strange way of dialing in a tone, like you're looking after the front end of the amp and almost doing opposites to what you're doing down on the pedal board with your EQ pedals, but it's pretty much the only way you can start to change the core dynamic of how the amp sounds in the mix. So as always, I'm capturing this recording using the Mesa Boogie 112 Recto cab in the corner with a V30 inside. You can see the position of the mic there on the speaker, and it's just off the dust cap. And then I've got the ISO cab just sitting over the top to keep the noise down. Look, it seems to work really well, and I get a really consistent microphone sound every time out of the amp, no matter what I'm doing. And there's just so many pros to having it in an isolation box. Sure, I'd like to get some room reflections at times doing certain recordings, but as a general rule, I haven't stopped using it since I made it. You can't hear the string noise of my guitar when I strum down, and I can sit wherever I want and not pick that up and do whatever recording I need to do. It's just a really clean way of getting a recording, I find. So as always, guys, I had a great time trying to replicate this tone using the Marshall DSL and a few pedals. And at the end of the day, really use that effects loop if you got one. Use the EQ pedals and use your ears. That's about all. Take care, and I'll see you next week. Bye now.